So it seems that Games Workshop might not have been quite done with the guard reveals. Sitting casually in a picture from the Codex appears to be a brand new fortification, a reimagination of the Aegis Defence line, with rules that make the infantry hiding behind it hardier than ever. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking Guard once more, and I honestly thought that Games Workshop was done for Guard reveals. After they showed us the new Rogol Dawn and Lord Solar Leontus, it did really sound like they were the last things. They did describe Lord Solar as the last reveal, so it's kind of surprising to find one extra model hiding both as a datasheet in the Codex, and also basically shown off to us both in a picture in the Codex, plus also casually sitting in the Warhammer Community Preview article for today. Let's talk about the likely release of this new fortification, look over its datasheets from the Guard Codex, and talk about the idea of replacing fortifications in general. So first up, the datasheet for the Aegis Defence line being in the Codex was perhaps one of the only surprises that there was left. Pretty much everything else seemed to have leaked, or Games Workshop had shown off the models, though I guess realistically a bunch of barricades isn't exactly the most exciting bit of the new Codex, so maybe it wasn't the first thing reported on. The fact that it got a guard-specific datasheet was just a little bit surprising, seeing as it's always been a generic choice before, one that literally every faction could take, though admittedly the aesthetic of the thing does fit in better with guard than just about any of the other armies about, vaguely Imperial and mass-produced in style, and kind of fits in with the flavour of Duckian diving, firing your lasgun over the barricades while taking shots from whatever Xenos horrors that you're fighting. It was also a surprise to see the datasheet, because there's no model on sale for the Aegis Defence line from Games Workshop currently. I do vaguely remember when it came out many years ago, though I suppose it's a fairly old kit as it goes right now, and the other things that came out at a similar sort of time, including the Bastion and the Sky Shield landing pad, neither of those are on sale anymore either. In the last few editions of the game, they've been datasheets that could be taken by any army, whether you're Imperium, Xenos, or Chaos, though in general it's very rarely made sense to take them. I think Games Workshop almost deliberately keeps them niche, so you just don't have every single army spamming out an Aegis line or a Bastion or something. I can see why that makes sense, to be honest. You probably want the emphasis to be on the faction that you're playing, as opposed to some slabs of rockcrete. The other clue that there might be a new model was that there were no rules for the gun, the quad autocannon emplacement, the little gun turret that you could usually operate with one crewman and give yourself a little bit more firepower, often better against planes. With all the reveals of the new codex, again it maybe wasn't too surprising that the picture of the defense line didn't gain a whole load of traction, but now the same picture was uploaded in Games Workshop's recent community preview article, a few guardsmen and a Rogol Dawn tank fighting alongside this thing, several very modular sets of paneling that are basically designed as big Imperial Aquillas, which is kind of cool. It really does look like these fortifications have been through the wars though. There's all sorts of bullet marks and potholes and all sorts of things in them. Certainly looks like they've taken their fair share of punishment defending the Emperor's forces. Compared with the previous one, it looks, at least at first glance, that these might be a little bit taller than the past one. The sections that the guardsmen are directly behind look about man high, and then there's some lower sections that might be a little bit easier to fire out of. From this partial glimpse of the thing, it's not 100% obvious exactly where the joins are between them. The previous defense line had multiple short sections that you could put next to each other. I'm not 100% sure from this image whether it's multiple sections just put next to each other loosely on the table, or whether all these are glued together in some way. In any case, the bits don't appear to be from any existent Imperial terrain. It very much does look like a new model to me. It's perhaps a bit strange though that it wasn't revealed with the rest of the guard previews. I wouldn't expect it to have taken any limelight away from the Rogol Dawn or the Ontus or all the rest of the stuff, but it seems a bit odd that if you've got a new model for an Aegis line coming out and it's going to be in the guard codex, I don't see why you wouldn't show it off on one of their Monday previews. I guess it's not impossible that it's still one that's left in reserve though. Maybe they'll just talk about it in one of their Warhammer community articles. Looking at its rules in the Guard Codex, I must admit the datasheet for it actually does seem surprisingly usable for a fortification. I feel like often in the various codexes they just tend to be a bit overcosted for what they do, but this is actually really quite cheap at 40 points, and if you could potentially be effectively increasing the durability of multiple squads at the same time, it looks like it could actually genuinely be worth it. We don't know how much defense line you get, but it seems like the traits described for it is that it works for anyone receiving the cover from it, not just guard, so if the enemy captures it then they get it instead. And then it's got a whole bunch of the 9th edition terrain traits: defense line, light cover, heavy cover, area terrain, and a defensible obstacle. Light cover and heavy cover makes sense, you'd expect it to increase the saves, and this would make it work in combat too. Defensible means that you could hold steady or set to defend, so get a minor combat buff, but perhaps the most confusing thing is why it's designated as area terrain as opposed to a barricade, as it quite clearly looks like a barricade, and there are rules that work perfectly well for barricades in the 40k core book. I'm not 100% sure how they reconcile that. I guess potentially the back of the model might have some sort of foot plates that you could nose your models into, and then just the ones that are actually touching it would get the area terrain benefit. But I feel like if there was ever a unit that needed to have the barricade trait, it was probably this. A bit strange why it doesn't have it. You can't destroy it or anything. Once it's down, it's just terrain. And then it just has the one special rule called Reinforced Construction. This basically makes its cover save a bit better, and it does apply both to range attacks and melee as best I can tell. The Reinforced Construction worsens enemy AP by -1 whenever they're attacking something, so it almost sort of gives the troops receiving cover the benefit of Armour of Contempt. Any AP will just go that little bit less far. Probably the headline is that usually means that it's often going to be a 2+ to saves if you're taking cover in it. Really not bad for standard guardsmen, effectively gives them a 3+ save while they're manning it. And it means that actually having them standing in the open shooting isn't quite as much of a suicide mission as it would have been before. It's probably most used for anything that has slightly better saves than standard guardsmen though. Kazakin or Scions would go up to an effective 2+ save provided they were being shot by something with AP, and in particular Bulgarin looked like they'd be very hard to shift with this. A 2+ save as standard, then light cover, then the worsening AP -1. You'd need AP -3 at the least just to put them down to a 3+ save with the slab shields. I guess if you could plonk this down on an objective out in the open and put some Bulgarin on it, then the enemy might have some serious trouble dislodging them. Otherwise, there's no rules for any sort of gun, so I guess this new kit is probably not going to come with that quad turret. And it does appear that the rules would apply to any allied armies, which in theory could be interesting for anything with higher saves, though it wouldn't stack with any sort of Armour of Contempt as best I can tell, as it worsens the AP by -1, and that means that they wouldn't stack with the same rule. It does make me wonder if it's going to see a bit more of a generic release though, with similar rules like this for all factions, or whether it's basically going to become the unique fortification of the Astra Militarum now, in the same way that Space Marines get their Bunker and Death Guard get their Miasmic Malignifier. It is maybe just a little bit curious to see that fortification kits also appear to have a shelf life from Games Workshop as well as armies. I guess this means theoretically that if you have an Aegis Defence line, it now technically might be a bit redundant. If this kit is the one that gets the rule support going forward, I guess they wouldn't support the rules for the gun anymore. And I guess things might get a little bit dodgy with the panels and things if this one has a significantly different footprint to the previous one. I'm sure you could just use the old panels with the new rules. It might just be a bit on the weird side if the new upgrade one gets a much bigger coverage or a much smaller one. I guess you'd theoretically be gaining or losing out rules wise there. Not that it probably makes the biggest difference, to be honest though. To be fair to them, I think the new one does look a bit cooler. Armor plates made up of fun Imperial Aquillas is pretty cool, though I do think that the old one was perfectly serviceable. Battlefield terrain doesn't need to be the most exciting thing, it is only really a backdrop to awesome armies and things. In any case, let me know what you think. Would you be tempted by a shiny new Eagle-themed Aegis Defence line if it came out as a generic option for all armies? And after they've FAQ'd the codex, do you think that it will be usable for the guard? Is that extra big cover save worth it for 40 points? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k content coming. I do tend to post new videos just about every day, and we'll have loads more for the guard. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can afford to keep on making videos keep coming like this quite so regularly. If you are enjoying a lot, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.